What's cracking, people? In this segment of my channel, I want to talk about those rare gaming moments that you just don't see or hear every day, and I feel truly stand out as something that in many ways shouldn't be forgotten and should also remain part of gaming going forwards. So where do I start? The Wii-mote was genius in my mind, and I personally put it up there with the arrival of the analog stick in terms of what it done for gaming. Unfortunately, the Wii-mote was also one of the most underused controllers in gaming history, and I actually find it quite tragic how underused it was. But when people got it right, I found it hard to play certain games any other way. Not only that, the Wii-mote created some absolutely amazing gaming moments where both software and hardware merged together to create something truly unique that other platforms simply didn't have. I want to talk about 3 games in this discussion, not reviewing them, but simply highlighting what the Wii-mote brought to their experience. Those 3 games are No More Heroes, Silent Hill Shattered Memories, and Metroid Prime 3 Corruption. So let's start with No More Heroes, shall we? One thing everyone can agree on when talking about the Wii-mote is that it's probably the most intuitive controller ever made. Universally, everyone of all ages can pick this thing up and, depending on the software, almost naturally understand how to use it, especially when it's focused on motion controls. But what a lot of people forget about, though, is that the Wii-mote also had a speaker built into it, which was used in many games, but I first truly experienced it with No More Heroes. You play as a character, Travis Touchdown, who wants to be the #1 assassin in the world and takes contracts from his employer via his mobile phone. This happens quite early on in the game when you first see him using his phone. But the phone doesn't ring on the TV screen. The ringing first comes from the Wii-mote's speaker. But this is the moment of genius that I want to talk about. Without even thinking about it, I lifted that Wii-mote up and placed it next to my ear, exactly how I would with a mobile phone. Moments later, I laughed at myself and what I just done, but then suddenly the voice of the employer starts talking to me without any button prompts. You instinctively do something that is beyond what is considered the norm when using game controllers. And for that reason, I thought it was absolutely brilliant. So as I mentioned, the second game I want to talk about is Silent Hill Shattered Memories, which is a reimagining of the original Silent Hill that came on the PlayStation 1. It's also a little gem of a title on the Wii that, if you do own a Wii, and I feel like you should try and go out and get it. It did come on other consoles, I believe, maybe the PlayStation 2 and the PSP, but it's an older game now. But the Wii-mote, once again, is used here in the core gameplay, as well in subtle little ways that add to the horror and immersion of the title. A portable radio is used in many Silent Hill games as a way of letting you know that monsters are nearby, through the static noise it generates, as well as possibly hearing distorted whispers from various individuals. In the Wii version of the game, the Wii-mote is used for many things like puzzle solving, controlling your flashlight, as well as using your mobile phone, which in this case replaces the radio from the previous games. Not only did I found that using your Wii-mote to control your flashlights felt very intuitive, but once again the speaker on the Wii-mote was now used to replicate that static noise that was once a radio, as I said. What I found with having a speaker on the Wii-mote was that it added a dynamic level of sound that further accompanied the sound generated by, say, your TV or your surround sound system, whatever you got plugged in. With having this additional sound so close to you, it felt a lot more personal, especially when it was used in conjunction with a gameplay element, like hearing that radio static getting louder and louder as enemies got closer, or listening to someone talking to you through your mobile phone, just like you would in No More Heroes. You'd hold that thing, the Wii-mote next to your ear. But in regards to Silent Hill, the voices you heard weren't always the most pleasant sounding. And through another simple use of hardware and software, I was fully immersed into this horror title, and I haven't forgotten those little moments, and I fondly remember my playthrough of that game. The game itself had its issues, but like I said, I'm talking about the little Wii-mote features that were used in this that created some very unique gaming moments that, like I said, I won't forget. So lastly, I want to talk about Metroid Prime 3 Corruption, and not only about how amazing it felt to play a first-person adventure using pointer controls, something that, thanks to Prime 3, I now personally rate above using twin analog sticks, even at times a mouse and keyboard. But it was more about how, without those pointer controls, Prime 3 would have been a completely different game, and probably not for the better. Now, when I say completely different, I don't mean completely different, but it would have felt more the same, and I'll get onto that now. I personally rate the Metroid Prime trilogy as arguably one of, if not the best trilogy numbered games ever made from an all-round point of view. Each game is fundamentally solid. They play exceptionally well, have fantastic sound, music, and gameplay to follow. Metroid Prime, the original, is in my top 10 games ever. It's pretty much gaming perfection on all levels for me. Prime 2 was a great follower, and I'd easily scored it 9 out of 10. But it follows a bit too close to what the original Metroid Prime already achieved on the epic levels. So Prime 2 is your typical sequel. It's great. I mean, Prime 2 is really good. I think it's underrated. It's really good. But it wasn't game-changing like the original Prime. And then we come to Prime 3, which is still a fantastic title that I'd easily score 9 out of 10 again. But it ends up being the weaker out of the trilogy. And this is mostly because, at its core, it's another Prime title. But what stops it from completely feeling like more of the same? Its controls, and more importantly, what the Wii-mote and nunchuck combination does for Samus's base skills, as well as new ones that completely change the gameplay and combat. I always laughed at the original Wii commercials for this game, where you have some idiot people, leaping over couches, to take cover from enemy fire, whilst also, overly exaggerated on the way they use the Wii-mote and nunchuck to perform the new skills in the game. I mean, in reality, when you're playing Prime 3 or the Wii in general, you never have to act that way. In fact, the Wii-mote and nunchuck are one of the most relaxed controllers I've ever used, because you can hold it in pretty much any position you want. But yes, you have to move the controllers, but not to the point where you'll ever get fatigued from acting like a nutter. I mean, if some people want to play, like that, then that's fine. I done it, while I was playing Wii Sports Resort. Especially the sword fighting game where your me was like a samurai running along a beach or a cliff edge, hacking at all the enemies that advance towards you. A great game, by the way, Wii Sports Resort. Underrated, I feel, as a video game. It's not often when you can say that many games actually make you feel like you were that character themselves. Prime 1 gets you there 95% of the way, as well as Mario in Mario 64, etc. And in Prime, you got the wonderful use of the visor and how it interacts with the environment. But in my opinion, Metroid Prime 3, when it comes to at least the Metroid Prime games, it nails it in making you feel like Samus Aran. The game actually retains all of its visual effects in regards to Samus's visor getting steamed up, malfunctioning, or seeing reflective flashes of her face, as nearby explosions, it illuminates it. But now we have these new controls that get you to interact with objects and enemies in intuitive ways that could never feel the same if you were using more traditional controllers. And this is all put to use at the very start of the game. And Samus wakes up in her spaceship, activates her famous various suit of armor, sits up and stares at the ship's control panel in front of her. During this scene, you get to look around the cockpit, whilst also activating its many inputs by pointing, clicking, pushing, pulling, twisting the Wii-mote in order to engage these controls, and it feels wonderful. For many Metroid fans, we've always wanted to see inside Samus's gunship, but not only can we see inside it now, we can also control it to an extent in ways we never could before. So Samus later pilots the ship and docks onto a larger Galactic Federation vessel as part of the story, and this is where the developers show you that the enemies are going to be different in this game, or at least you're going to have to fight them in a more interactive way. The pointer controls are essential for this, and I couldn't imagine how an analog stick would be able to replicate it, possibly with only a mouse and keyboard coming close. As a little game to get you started, to get you used to the speed of the controls and the accuracy of your shots, on the landing deck there is a small electronic object. It's like a cylinder that fires up into the air once you push a button, and it can be juggled in the air by you shooting it. It's a wonderfully addictive little training game, that also shows off how precise the pointer controls can be, and there are achievements locked to it if you can keep it juggled in the air for X amount of bounces. And I remember sitting there for ages when I first got there, trying to get as many bounces as I can. It was great. And then later on, as you progress through the ship, many of the new control and gameplay concepts come to light, and controlling Samus has never felt so good. But the real magic begins when you descend down to the first planet and are forced to fight space pirates who now have attacks and new designs based off the new control scheme. This is something that is easily overlooked, or at least I feel like it's being forgotten again. Controls in games have in some ways come to a standstill. People seem content with the current more widespread control schemes that are used on other consoles and will scoff at things like the Wii-mote, calling them unnecessary or simply not as good. But let's quickly use an example here that I feel will highlight how possibly a new control scheme can not only get developers to think outside of the box, but also offer the gamer a fresh yet familiar take on their much loved franchises. Now, I've played pretty much every Uncharted game. Well, at least I played all of them on the PlayStation 3, and aside from a few changes, the gameplay has remained pretty much the same. And for me, fatigue quickly started to set in as I moved through each game. What if, for example, Uncharted used the Wii-mote and nunchuck? Or in Sony's blatant panic reaction to the Wii, the games used the move and navigation controller? What new enemies could be created based around those new controls? What new gameplay ideas involving the puzzles in these games, the adventure and exploration and the combat? What could be incorporated with these new controls? And my mind just races with ideas. And this is what happened to Prime 3. The core game remained the same, but the way you played it changed. But if it had remained the same, I know for a fact fatigue would have set in, as the formula was already too familiar due to the previous titles. Sorry, I went off on one there, didn't I? So, where was I? So yeah, the space pirates. So these guys jump off their dropships and try to kill you. They raise their new shields and start shooting from behind them. Now, in most other games, you would try to shoot their exposed parts, which you can still do here. But the more effective way and highly more interactive and entertaining way is to flick the nunchuck forwards. This activates Samus's plasma-like grappling hook, which latches onto the pirate's shield. Then you rip it out of their arms by flicking a nunchuck controller back towards you. And this was awesome, not just visually, but also what it adds to the way you take on these fights. It added another level of tactical combat that I felt is rarely seen in video games, especially in conjunction with the controllers. and it made most standard encounters feel quite engaging, every single time, and that's great. You never want to get fatigued at the base mechanics, and this continues throughout the entirety of Metroid Prime 3, where Samus's skills increase and your interaction with the game through the use of the Wii-mote and the nunchuck continue to evolve and improve, and it's something I'll truly miss if those control types are forgotten in time. So yeah, those were 3 rare gaming achievements that I feel elevated those games, above the norm into something more engaging and, especially memorable. So let me know your own comments in the comments section. Do you agree or disagree with the points I raised, and what other amazing Wiimote moments can you think, of that truly, stood out from the crowd? Once again, thanks for your time, and I look forward to hearing from you. Peace.